My name is Tiffany Scurry. I'm the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Western Digital Technologies in San Jose. And if we can just do a brief round of introductions with the other judges on today's panel.
I'll go. I'm Steve Prezina. I work for Western Asset Management Company, wholly owned subsidiary of Franklin Templeton. And I'm working in the finance department, manager of financial and regulatory reporting and tax compliance as well.
I'm Bob Stone. I'm a retired federal executive and a retired adjunct professor of business ethics at University of Redlands.
My name is Robert Beamer, and I manage a financial practice in addition to work I do in higher administration.
Great. So let me just give some opening remarks here about this morning's session, and then we'll turn it over to the team to get started. So in this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to us, the judges. Please make sure that everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted, and when you're finished, the judges will ask you questions for 10 to 15 minutes. During the Q&A portion, both you and the judges will stay in character, but after the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside of the role playing. And so with that, I turn it over to the team.
Thank you for your time today. Before we begin our presentation, we would like to lay the groundwork for our relationship with you for your understanding. We are a consulting firm, and you are the board members of the Suwannee River Water Management District Governing Board, and we are advising you on the case at hand. Thank you. Leonardo da Vinci once said that water is the driving force of all nature. And this quote holds just as much truth. Oh my goodness. My apologies. Holds just as much truth in Florida as anywhere on the planet. Water is everywhere in Florida, and it's used for all sorts of reasons. Just like Florida's world famous beaches, and even the historic Everglades National Park. Water even has a large presence in the Suwannee River Water Management District in North Florida near Gainesville. And in this district, we go to Gilchrist County and find a little gem called Ginnie Springs. Hi, my name is Clyde Tucker, and I'm with Top Hat Consulting, and I'm joined today by my colleagues,
Emma Faircloth,
Willem Slater,
and Vito Di Giosa.
Today we're going to be talking to you about Nestle and its relationship with Ginnie Springs, all the while assessing the sustainability of Nestle's business practices at Ginnie Springs.
Recently, Ginnie Springs has been the subject of a requested 5-year renewal of their existing 20-year permit with Seven Springs for the same allotment of water that is allowed under their current permit, which allows them to withdraw up to 1.152 million gallons of water a day. This permit will remain in effect until the permit renewal review process is complete. This practice of pumping the max amount of water per day has prompted the Suwannee River Water Management Board to assess the essential question.
Should the Suwannee River Management District Board renew Seven Springs pumping license in order for Nestle to bottle?
Now we come to today's agenda. We'll first state our recommendation in order to let you know our position up front. We will then go through our ethical analysis, our legal analysis, our financial and economic analysis, and end off with a conclusion.
Our recommendation is as follows. Seven Springs Water Company should be granted permit renewal to the terms of 1.152 million gallons pumped per day, maximum at Ginnie Springs.
Now, we understand the situation that you are in as a board. Suwannee River Water Management District has jurisdiction in 14 counties. Hundreds of springs are under the Suwannee River Water Management District jurisdiction, so you must apply regulatory rigor to decisions, just as you always should. And given the Ginnie Springs issue at hand with Nestle, the public outcry has been quite stiff. As my colleagues will explain, Nestle's image in the realm of sustainability is seemingly not great, but we are here to advise you on the business implications of Nestle's position in this case and what they can do to move sustainable economic growth to your district while being environmentally responsible. Now, our dilemma is quite simple. We want to provide solutions that are cohesive with UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you might wonder, what is a UN SDG goal, as we call it? UN SDG goals are Sustainable Development Goals, or as they call them, global goals, with a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all.
The first UN SDG goal we would like to go for is the SDG goal number 6, which is to ensure availability and sustainability management of water and sanitation for all. The second UN SDG goal is number 8, is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all.
Critically important to the decision-making process is the application of an ethical decision-making approach. Whereas such large decisions require careful examination of stakeholders, doing so has enabled us to further understand the situation. Stakeholders include the Ray family, property owners and developers of the recreation park at Ginnie Springs. Closely related is Seven Springs Water Company, the family-owned firm holding the water rights on property, including the well permit approved by the Swanee River Water Management District. As Nestle's harvesting contributes the most to water collection at Ginnie Springs, its role as the biggest, baddest customer synonymously financially incentivizes other stakeholders such as state and local economies, Gilchrist County residents, and Floridians. Arguably most important are the critters and ecosystem directly affected by the proposed permit renewal. Whereas Nestle upholds pledges of accordance within all relevant regulatory and state standards, the company is an exemplary leader, showcasing how bottling water should be done in the interest of Florida and its people.
So can Nestle be environmentally sustainable and still make a profit? In the past, Nestle has been the forefront of a multitude of environmental and social issues, such as deliberately misleading language within ad campaigns, sourcing water without a permit, and frankly, being the largest plastic water bottle producer in the world is not necessarily the best look. But granted, Nestle has done things recently to better themselves and demonstrate their commitment to integrity and sustainability with internal and external structural changes, as well as goals to reduce emissions along their value chain and become certified in the Alliance for Water Stewardship. Their 2030 ambition is to strive for zero environmental impact in their operations. But we're not here to just play defense for Nestle, and we're not here to evaluate them either, because we're here to make the right decision for the right reason. We want to come to a decision on whether or not this permit renewal will help or hinder the surrounding community, environment, stakeholders, and Florida as a whole.
Because Nestle operates the largest commercial extraction of natural spring water, various claims questioning this practice are warranted. Given the company's accessibility and utility of its available and future resources, approval of the permit would allow for the company to continue making significant positive impacts within community, conservation, education, and economic sectors. Previously mentioned United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are integrated into Nestle's efforts to meet growing societal needs. The global initiative, Nestle for Healthier Kids, aims to help 50 million kids lead healthier lives by 2030, having already reached 79.33 million. Such is done through supporting parents and caregivers on their journey to raise healthier kids and providing families with the tools to push their kids through school. Better understanding Nestle's role and influence upon decision considerations, justification of our recommendation is necessary, done so through a utilitarian lens in which the greatest good for the greatest number of those involved is prioritized. Ultimately, our recommendation accounts for each stakeholder's continued longevity and overall well-being above all.
Thank you. Thank you, Willem. Now we move into the legal analysis of the case. We've broken the legal overview down into 3 core sections. First, as my colleague Emma told you earlier, Nestle and the pumping company Seven Springs are appealing to you for a 5-year extension of the current permit, with a ceiling, of course, that will increase the gallons per day pumped from the springs. Secondly, the Ray family is a key stakeholder because they have water rights over the use of not only the water itself, but also the surrounding property, which inclines them to have a lot of say in this situation. And the third, of course, is the bedrock of our legal analysis, the Florida Water Resources Act of 1972. The 1972 Act's purpose is that the Water Resources Act requires the state to establish a minimum flow of water and a minimum water level in the aquifer, at which further withdrawals will be significantly harmful in the water resources or even the ecology of the area. In considering the contentious issue of the wish to pump even more water, we looked at the law and found that Florida allows this type of pumping to be done, assuming that 3 criteria are met. Now, there are 3 conditions for a permit under this act. The first tests whether or not the permit has a reasonable or beneficial use. And we are here to say that there is a reasonable and beneficial use because the Ray family can use the funding from the pumping by partnering with Nestle and Seven Springs. They can use it to keep the park open and in great shape for their busy seasons. And the local economy can even benefit because a Nestle expansion can offer greater economic opportunities for the surrounding community, as my colleagues will show you a little later on. The second condition tests whether or not the permit will interfere with any presently existing legal use of water. We assess that the recreational use of Ginnie Springs will not be hindered, and it would still be used for recreation to the public should this permit be approved. And lastly, the Act looks and sees if the permit is consistent with the public interest. Again, we come back to the subject of recreational use. Nature is praised and viewed positively when folks are able to spend time in the springs with their friends and family. So, just as I showed, this permit on its face fits the legal criteria that I just showed you. Now, looking at the permit through the lens of UN SDG goals is very important in this case. Goal 6 is all about clean water and sanitation. And more specifically, 6B is about supporting and strengthening the participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management. The fact that we are here today discussing this case is proof that this goal is being exercised because there are many people that are aware of this, which of course is one of the huge goals of Goal 6. And Goal 8 promotes decent economic growth and job creation, which, while we know if the permit would be approved on the legal basis, this approval would allow Nestle to expand in North Florida, which is known to have very few economic opportunities such as a Nestle expansion.
Thank you, Clyde. Now we'll be talking about the financial and economic analysis. First, we'll be talking about the positives and negatives Nestle has had on the state of Florida, Ginnie Springs, now and for the future. So let's start off with the positives. Currently, Nestle has a substantial position in the state of Florida, including 3 bottling factories and 13 branch offices and warehouses, distribution centers, and a growing employment base of over 900 employees. If this permit is approved, we could see an estimated 171 new jobs being added to the 900 already put. The next and most important positive is that it has boosted Florida's GDP. And we're not only talking about a couple $100,000, we're talking hundreds and millions of dollars. Later on in the presentation, Emma will go more in depth with those numbers. There are some negatives though. Environmentalists have been saying that Nestle, with this permit being approved, Nestle is doing the wrong thing and it will hurt the environment more. As a result, that could be, you could lose a lot of customers if they get this, if it's on the news or they see it and don't think it's good at all. Another thing is that Nestle's public image can be tarnished as a result of this. Another thing is the $115 permit fee. It is too short. You might as well not pay it. It should be more expensive for a company like Nestle who makes millions and billions of dollars every day. Next slide, please. Other implications. In this one, we'll be talking about the Ray family and Nestle's relationship. In 1971, Robert and Barbara Ray bought Ginnie Springs with the purpose of preserving the land and protecting the waters. There have been many environmental threats that have come and go. But why Nestle? The Ray family needs money to maintain and protect springs. Nestle offers that by giving the money to Florida and helping out preserving that water. As said by Risa Ray, partnering with Nestle will help this family protect the land by keeping it in its natural state and thereby protecting the waters. Now I'll be handing it to Emma, where she will be explaining the numbers more in depth.
Thank you, Vito. Now I will take you through Nestle Waters North America's Florida fiscal impact, so we can get a better understanding on how Nestle impacts Florida's economy. Fiscal impacts are those that directly impact local governments, and they are determined by examining taxes and other payments Nestle makes to the government that are used to provide services to its businesses and employees. In 2018, Nestle paid over $7 million in state and local taxes. And tax revenues like these are incredibly important because they're used to fund the community, fund fire and police departments, roads, utilities, human services, parks and rec, etc. So now knowing that, I would like to go into Nestle's bottling facilities, their locations, and the new expansion project that relies on Ginnie Springs water. So Nestle employs more than 900 people in the state of Florida. Their 3 water bottling facilities are located and highlighted on the map. They're located in Pasco, Madison, and Gilchrist counties. And one thing we wanted to stress was the impact that the High Springs facility expansion in Gilchrist County would have on Florida, which directly relies on the water being drawn from Ginnie Springs. The 3 Nestle Water North America bottling facilities in Florida generate significant operating revenues with a positive net fiscal impact for their respective county governments. The phase 1 expansion of the High Springs bottling facility includes the renovation of 2 bottling lines and is estimated to be completed by 2021. After build out, the factory will generate an approximate taxable value of $25.4 million for the factory after the expansion is completed. If this permit is renewed, can Nestle meet these goals and be environmentally sustainable and still make money? With assuredness, my team and I can say, yes, they absolutely can. This here is an ethical argument and it's a business argument. Permit renewal will help the surrounding community, environment, and stakeholders through providing monetary benefit to the state and acting in the best interest of the public and springs. With this permit renewal, Nestle can ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation. With the power of the marketplace, Nestle can help promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth with full and productive employment and decent work for all. So with this now in mind, we can take a look at how Nestle adds economic value to Florida while taking permit renewal into consideration. Nestle purchased over $125 million in goods and services and taxes within the state of Florida in 2018. This would be considered direct spending or the direct impact. So the expenditures made by those providing these goods and services would be considered indirect spending, and the employee spending of Nestle would be induced spending. So this also generates additional economic impacts. Nestle's operations in 2018 had a total economic impact of over $256 million in the state of Florida. This includes supporting 1,737 direct, indirect, and induced Florida jobs with total wages of over $93 million. Additionally, Nestle purchased over $125 million of goods and services and other operating expenditures made to the state. So these benefits that we see are not enjoyed only by those who work directly for Nestle, but by many others who support the economy and support the company through the provision of goods and services, the High Springs facility. Such indirect economic impacts are incredibly important to consider because they have what is called a cascading multiplier effect upon local communities. So as Nestle employees earn wages, they then spend their money with other Florida businesses whose employees in turn would do the same, resulting in an ongoing ripple effect as money is respent through our state's economy.
Here's our recommendation once again, that Seven Springs Water Company should be granted a permit renewal to the terms of 1.152 million gallons pumped per day maximum at Ginnie Springs. We just took you through a fantastic ethical analysis showing that your decision as a board would be ethical on utilitarian grounds. And of course, we took you through a fantastic legal analysis that shows that the state of Florida allows this to happen by law. And of course, we've also talked about the numbers, and the numbers are there to show that your district can benefit from this expansion. My apologies for that. So coming back, we hope to paint a clear picture, just as Da Vinci used to do hundreds of years ago, that your district can benefit economically and that there is a way forward by committing our recommendation on the basis of the key sustainable goals that we touched on earlier. And while we agree that water is the driving force of all nature, we would like to add that water can now become the fuel to power the business world in a new era of sustainable strategies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Top Hat, for your presentation. I'll start with a question here and open it up to the other judges to add their questions as well. I'd like to start with focusing on part of the ethical dimension of your analysis. I heard you talk a little bit about one of the ethical issues being reputation related. So to the extent that Nestle has some reputational blemishes with respect to its sustainability practices, how does your proposed solution address those, if it does? And how does Nestle's reputation reflect upon us as a board if we do go forward and approve this permit?
Well, what we've seen through the research of Nestle is we've seen that they have learned from their mistakes in the past. So allowing them to continue their work and now their new sustainable ways that they're pioneering for their operations, allowing them to be able to have a gain in revenue and perhaps lower some costs would allow them to basically, put the revenue together in order to invest in those new sustainable initiatives that can help repair their image, and then also really lead to more sales and more revenues, more income, which would then provide the district with many more opportunities.
And I would like to.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, just on top of that, there were a lot of other companies looking to get into this High Springs facility, and Nestle really in the end seems like the best choice. And if it's not Nestle, someone else is going to come along and try and, renew and pick up this permit. And we've seen Nestle, recently they have done more to better themselves to kind of demonstrate this integrity and sustainability. And they put out plenty of statements like the 2030 ambition to strive for zero environmental impact. They have new water bottles that they're even creating to that use PET plastic. And so they're looking to have full PET plastics for all of their water bottles. They're included in 3 of their different water bottle groups. So I just wanted to put that out there and add on to that. Thank you.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. I do have a follow-up question. Are we allowed under the applicable laws or regulations to attach any conditions to the license? You talked about how revenue will be generated and Nestle has some new programs and so forth, could we issue the license or approve the license renewal and attach conditions that some of that revenue must be directed towards these environmental initiatives or things that we want to see Nestle doing?
I'm not at liberty to provide a definitive answer on that question at this point, but I do know that your purview as the board does go quite far. And your district, one of the 5 districts, does have the ability to, make the decision on this permit, of course, but I'm not entirely sure if, conditions can be added.
I can answer that. So conditions can actually be added because this case that we're looking at, there has been, recent outcomes to the case, which we're not addressing in this presentation because, as we're looking at before 2020, right? So we actually did see with the permit renewal, there were recommendations made with the permit renewal, such as having to make sure there's a sustainable yield with the springs. So making sure that it stays at a certain level to where it can replenish itself. Also, they did, the Suwannee River Water Management District, they did add a little bit of guidelines, I guess you could say, like you were requesting with the 2021 renewal, but we weren't addressing that in this case just because of the timeline we were focusing on. But yes, there are changes, I guess, that can be made to the permit.
I had a couple questions. If if no one is going to go next, Emma. So on that point you touched on, my question was along those lines of the source of the water. If there was any concerns about the quantity or any, we know about the West Coast where if it doesn't snow in the Sierras, the Colorado doesn't get filled, and that would have you, and the water doesn't flow down into the Southern California. So is there any concerns with limited sourcing from the actual source of water? And then my other question was around the environmental groups, and I was wondering if there was any consideration or research done around their particular, I should say, allegations, if that's the right word, in the proposed or the supposed threat. Have we done any research or studies, or have any looked at any studies that potentially were done that could address some of those things that would sort of mitigate any concerns? That's all
I mean, I can answer the question. So you gave us a 2-part question. So I just kind of wanted clarification. What was the first part you wanted me to address?
Just the availability of the water from the original source, if there's an original source.
Yeah. So that's kind of the sustainable yield that I brought up. That is something that environmentalists use to see like at what level the springs can be at to where it would still be able to replenish itself, because you can take a certain amount of water out without seeing a difference in the changing levels of the springs from the research that we've done. But we did see environmentalists, we had some people on one side and some people on the other side. Some were saying, okay, the water, like, what if something happens? What if, there's a drought or the springs aren't being upkept? Just like one small problem, like it can have a cascading effect. But we saw that Nestle pledged to, I forget the term for it, but it's about replenishing. So like pumping water back into the springs in case, you do see the spring levels going down. So it's called recharging, that's the word. So there is the implementation of recharging the springs. And also another thing that Nestle does, they do, they monitor, they have different bottling facilities in Florida and different springs that they pump from. So they look at the seasons and they look at the weather and everything, and they kind of take that into play. So sometimes they'll fluctuate the amount of water they're getting from different springs, just based on, whatever's kind of going on with the springs. So there are practices in place to make sure that I mean, the springs don't dry out basically. So yeah, we did do the research with that.
And so there's some monitoring going on, and we would be able to see those reports, those monitoring reports, on an ongoing basis.
I don't know if they make it public information. It was really difficult to see any sort of actual like studies and getting that qualitative data. You know, finding the numbers was difficult. I mean, it was just articles where environmentalists and people who work for Nestle, they were just basically saying like, yeah, we measure the sustainable yield. We make sure, you know, we're allocating our water. So we're keeping a good balance between the springs. But as far as reporting on that, and if they make that public, I am not able to answer that with clarity. I would hope they would, you know, be public with how they maintain the springs, but I'm not sure beyond that. So.
Thank you.
I have two questions for you. You did a top-notch job of explaining what would happen if the permit was approved. What would the impact be of not approving the permit?
So the impact that if the permit was not approved is that those jobs that were estimated were not going to be there. And also that, you know, Nestle would not get more revenue from the water that they get. And as a result, that would be less money for the state of Florida and for the necessary places that need the money. So Nestle really needs the water in order for that, and need the permit to be approved in order to get that revenue, because the more money, the better.
Sure. I'm interested also, though, in what happens to the water. Just looking at the physical world, Nestle is, on the one hand, they take out 1 million gallons a day. What happens if they don't take out 1 million gallons a day? Is the county flooded? Is the downstream, is there an impact there? In other words, if they don't take out the water, does something good happen or does something bad happen?
Well, I definitely can answer this. You know, knowing that Florida has seasons where there are kind of, you know, a great deal of downpour, you do have a situation where if a hurricane were to hit the area, and let's say, I'll go meteorologist for a second here, and let's say the hurricane stopped and you know, drenched this area of Florida, which is known to be, I believe, right at sea level, then, you know, you would have flooding. And it's been seen in the past there as well. So the you know, the pumping of the water definitely does have a bit of a benefit, especially in the months when you have hurricane season.
Thanks. That's very clear. The other question is, if we approve the permit and something untoward happens that we can't foresee, do we have the power to amend it or to limit it? Are we stuck with it come hell or high water, as they say?
I believe that an amendment process could be you know, started in this permit, especially with the conditions. You know, having these conditions, you know, I'm sure there would be a clause where you as a board could work in a clause, you know, revisitation upon, you know, certain public outcry, official, you know, kind of public outcry. But there could be, I believe, revisitation within the, because, you know, this is an extension of 5 years. So like you said, you know, we don't want to be, if something happens in year 1, we don't want to be, you know, 4 more years worrying about this or dealing with it. So working in a revisitation every year, you know, sending out people on behalf of the board to assess what is going on to make sure they're not pulling the wool over the board's eyes would also be very helpful as well.
Thank you.
Clyde, does it have to be 5 years, or is that a mandate, or can we be 2.5 years?
you know, 5 years is what they are going for. I believe you can, I believe you can go, I believe that's maybe the max, I believe. So I think, you know, they're going for what they're trying to get basically, because they are asking for a hike in the GPD, the gallons per day. So I believe this is a way for them to say, okay, we're asking for a hike, but we're not going to make it longer, you know.
And to add on to that, we saw that the first time Nestle wanted to renew this permit, the Swanee board came back and they said, you know what, we're going to table this. We don't see right now how this is going to be in the best interest of the public. So they do have power when it comes to whether or not to renew the permit. And furthermore, as I kind of explained earlier, they do have a say in the guidelines of the permit. So if they wanted it to be less than 5 years, or if they wanted to change the max amount of water being pumped, they could do that if they wanted to, because they would just come back and say, okay, this is our proposal. Now let's work through this. What can we get this renewed? And Nestle would be, you know, yes or no. And we see in 2021, just recently, just like not even a month ago, it was finally approved. But of course, we weren't going to address that in the case because, like I said, this case study is, you know, kind of in like the 2019, 2020 mindset, so.
Okay, so we're at time, but I do want to make sure if Bob Beamer or Cynthia had questions that we could get those in before we start our feedback.
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Cynthia, I'll ask after you.
Okay, thanks. As you were considering your recommendation for a renewal and extension of this permit, did you look at the health and safety record of the facility and see how that relates to your recommendation?
The long and the short of the answer is we didn't quite look at that as much. We were keeping it more along the lines of addressing, you know, the recharge rates of the springs and sort of the environmental impact as well.
Yeah, and we also saw the Seven Springs facility. They used to not be owned by Nestle, and then Nestle bought them. And with this permit renewal, they're hoping to expand the Seven Springs water facility. So I did read just a little bit on how, you know, they wanted to make the facility a better place for work. They're raising the wages. Actually, the average wage from the water bottling facility is higher than the average county wage. So people are getting paid more when Nestle took over the facility that they're hoping to expand. So they did stress how they wanted to make the workplace inclusive and match their own company values. So we do see that a little bit with this facility.
Thank you very much. Just to keep it kind of brief, I know we're towards the end here, but I do want to circle back to Steve's second question. I don't think it got answered about looking at some of the stakeholder groups, environmental groups, and legitimizing their concerns. You had mentioned in your secondary research, you looked at some articles, and look, I mean, you can't really interview people in this context, but you know, just trying to pin down to local sentiment and environmental sentiment. If you had to guess the general feeling of whether or not this project should go ahead based on local constituents, so in the lens of your research, what would you say they would probably offer?
Well, you know, from the lens of a lot of the public outcry that we talked about, we have, you know, you have the environmental groups. There's an environmental group called Our Santa Fe River, and they are on, you know, various media outlets talking about how this shouldn't go through. However, of the employment expansion with the facility, you know, High Springs, where this is High Springs, Florida, is not a very large community, and it's not a very, you know, the socioeconomic status is quite down the ladder. So I think any one job that can be created or even sustained here goes a long way for a community of just thousands, basically. So I think the sentiment from an employment perspective of the locals is that, you know, this permit does need to be renewed in order to let Nestle continue to expand or continue operations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and break character now. Take a deep breath. You're done. Great job, first of all. This is not easy. And you're the first one of the day as well, early morning. So terrific job to all of you. Let's just have a few minutes here where we can share some feedback and maybe some coaching on, you know, as you continue to do these kind of presentations and go through this process. So from my perspective, maybe just two main pieces of feedback. One goes to organization of the overall presentation and the problem and solution that you're identifying. For me, sitting in the position of a board member having to make this decision, I had a little bit of a hard time following what was, you started with what is the question, but then all the different elements that as a decision maker I want to be thinking about, it was a little bit hard to piece them together because it wasn't organized in a way that the decision maker would be coming at it. And so it would be helpful, I think, when you're designing this kind of a presentation, to think about what is the decision maker going to be hearing and what information do they need to have? How are they going to be thinking about this decision? You may have picked up that in the judge's questions, these questions were drawing out a little bit more information and getting at a lot of the pros and cons. And so that's something that could have been worked in. You know, if you do grant this license, approve the application, here are the benefits of that. On the other hand, if you don't, here's what that would look like. So we were kind of missing the pros and cons of what the overall decision or impact of the decision would be. And the second thing I would say is decision makers, you know, like boards or executive committees, like having optionality. So there was kind of only one option presented here. It's either you approve the permit or you don't. Some additional options would have been nice, right? What if we approve the permit for a shorter period of time? What if we approve it conditionally? What if we approve it with conditions attached to make sure that Nestle behaves the way that we want them to behave? So maybe some different options to consider would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd like to second what Tiffany says. I think it's much more useful to us as a board, if we were a board, to deal with alternatives. One alternative that I would be interested in is there another company that would pay 3 times as much for the water? You know, is Nestle getting a super deal, or can we get a better deal from somebody else? The other thing is, and by the way, I think you did a terrific job. I just got an enormous amount of information in a short amount of time, and it was very clear, and the economic analysis was just, you couldn't have any questions after seeing that, or at least I couldn't. One criticism I would make is the ethical analysis. Ethics is infinitely greater than utilitarianism. And there's a lot of ways to handle it. One way to handle it is just to ask, who gets hurt? Does anybody get hurt by this? Does anybody get disadvantaged that we haven't thought about? Is the local supply of water in the future helped or hurt by this? And those are really some ethical considerations that go beyond utilitarianism. But I just felt very good about the presentation as a whole.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would second. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I thought the presentation was very good. I think it ran flowingly, if that's a good word. But I second Tiff took the comments right out of my mouth in terms of the options and the pros and cons. I mean, those are very key areas, and especially in business, like we are, boards love to see heat maps. They love to see, the range of possibilities. Okay, I mean, and I know it's difficult to do. I know it's hard to do, especially in a public and governmental type of arena. But there are sources that can give you a very good idea of that kind of information. And then it's a matter of judgment. I know that the ethical issue here is quite could be very broad. There are legal questions. There could be lawsuits by these environmentalists. So what is the extent of that potentially? And that could be endless, as we know. So touching on some of those areas makes the board members think through, and then we can, like we saw, the questions then come in and potentially focus in on certain issues down to a more particular item of interest. And at the end of the day, of course, we're the board, so we have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the industry, the area. We could get sued, if somebody takes it that far. So those are very important things for us to understand as the ground, fundamental things around, legal issues more than anything else, I think. But also the environmental issues, like Bob was saying. Those things need to be addressed as well. So very good team. I appreciate your efforts, and that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was definitely impressed by some of the answers and argumentations pro. It's already been stated by Bob, Steve, that the importance of really laying out the ethical side. And I think that that's only going to validate your argument more at the end of the day if you've been circumspect in how you lay out, everything that there is to know about the goods and the bads. Just one thing I'll say stylistically, I think with Q&A, there's a lot more strength with one answer to one question. When there's multiple answers, it's clear you did your homework, and I know it's kind of tough when you're sitting in the wings like, oh, but at the same time, one answer for one question is the best approach for Q&A, just from a stylistic perspective. Overall, great job. You presented a lot of information, and really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I would just add that it was nice to see the due diligence you had done. It really came out through your Q&A, that you had a lot more information that you could share. And again, how you balance that versus the formal part of the presentation is the challenge. The one thing I might caution you on is with regards to the comfort that you started to feel with the board. And there was a point at which the license fee was mentioned. It was noted it was kind of small for such a big company. And that's not a perspective that a consultant would offer, because it's more of a personal perspective versus a professional perspective. As a board, we set fees, and those are approved, and they're fair to all. And they're not supposed to be gauged on how successful you are, how unsuccessful you are. It's a fee. It's a paperwork for processing administratively. So you have to be a little careful to stay on your strong points, which were about the economic impact, and that they are a good corporate citizen, and that they run a plant that is clean and safe and healthy, and they treat their community and they pay their taxes. That's far more important than the value of the dollar amount of the fee.
Thank you.
All right, well, kudos to you for all the work that you put into this and the terrific job that you did. I hope that the feedback was helpful. I wish I had that kind of feedback when when I was in university. This is a terrific opportunity. I'm so glad that you're participating in it, and well done.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.